Hafaday, this is Congressman Nicholas. If you are a small business, you may be interested in a federal program called the State Small Business Credit Initiative. This program can provide federal funds to match equity investments into your company or help you get lower interest rates at local banks. To find out more on how this program can help your small business, please contact your Guam Congressional Office at 475-6453 or at michael.sannicolas@mail.house.gov.
This ad was paid for with official funds from the Office of Congressman Michael F.Q. San Nicolas.
Listen to The Point. Any speaker, anytime. Check us out on your FM radio at 93.3, 104.3 HD3, thepoint.gu, Facebook Live, YouTube Live, and tune in. And announcing radio.com. Download the app and hear The Point. Get the latest news, sports, entertainment, and more.
On demand.
Your phone is digital. Your life is digital. And we are too. 93.3, The Point.
Half a day. Patsy Gogri from Security Title with a real estate tip. A power of attorney can be a useful tool when a buyer or seller cannot be present to sign documents, such as a military member deployed overseas. To mitigate its fraudulent use, your escrow officer will contact the seller to make sure they know their property is being sold. When using a power of attorney, call the professionals at Security Title. We are here to help.
Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie is brought to you by Guahan Insurance Services. Sunday brunch at Mezcla Chamorro Fusion Bistro is back. Come and enjoy Mezcla's true taste of Guam. Open for 2 seatings at 10:30 a.m. and 12:30 p.m. $28.95 for adults and $14.95 for kids 5 to 11 years old. Call 479-2652 or 2653 for reservations.
Welcome to Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie, the only show on talk radio where common sense is a lot more common. Phone lines are now open at 888-TALK. That's 888-8255. And now, The Point proudly brings you Tall Tales with Senator Bob Klitzkie.
A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Here we go again, Wednesday afternoon, another exciting, elucidating, educational episode of Tall Tales. I'm going to start out with Zemi Ikotni. As you know, this is my backwards bilingual play on words, where I take the opportunity to show Tuck Chuck Todd how inferior PMSNBC's Meet the Press is to our own. Starting out with the Daily News editorial today, and once again, the Daily News has gotten back into the editorial business of actually writing editorials about Guam instead of publishing boilerplate from Gannett News Service or USA Today. They still got a ways to go. Today is no exception. Here's how we start out. Preserving our culture. Efforts to save Chamorro language important to Guam. Well, my response then is, why don't we start making some efforts? I've been very critical of the so-called efforts so far. Today will be no different. At one point, not so long ago, the Chamorro language was in serious decline. Robert A. Underwood, a longtime educator, former UOG president, and former Guam delegate, has said the Chamorro language can be considered endangered because it isn't being transmitted intergenerationally in the home. That's a fact. But there are strong efforts to reverse that course on Guam. I wonder what they are. Many younger Chamorros are making concerted efforts to pass the language down to their children. Kenneth Cooper and Francine Napity said they consider teaching Guam's indigenous language is a gift they're giving to their children, and they hope other families will do the same. So we've got the magic sample of 2 here. Both Cooper and Napity learned Chamorro as adults. Their children, Inina and Matatna, are being raised to speak Chamorro. The couple said there's a need to revitalize the language before it's too late. Assis Sabeti, whose mom is Chamorro, grew up on Guam and lives in Oklahoma. What language do they speak in Oklahoma, Jose?
Wheat. English.
Yeah, I've been to Oklahoma and I've heard them talk there, but I'm not quite sure what language it is.
Oh, what a beautiful morning.
Yeah, where the wind comes sweeping down the plain. Kamiko Branchud wants to create visual arts in Chamorro. Well, editorial board and Kamiko Branchud, I have news here that probably is going to come as a surprise to some of you folks in what I'm going to refer to as the Chamorro language establishment. Language is sound. That's all. That's all it is. Language is sound. Nothing more, nothing less. So how you're going to create visual arts in Chamorro, that's a good one. She thinks, Kamiko thinks art in Chamorro will bring more people to learn the language. I think if she could do art in Chamorro, it'd bring a lot more people to learn the language because I think it's impossible. Michael Bavacqua learned Chamorro as an adult and is one of the island's top proponents of the language. Depends on what you mean by a top proponent, I think. Before the pandemic, he hosted weekly Chamorro lessons at local coffee shops. Now he offers a weekly language session over Zoom. Since doing so, the number of students has boomed. I don't think you can learn a language over Zoom. I'm not speaking here just from standing on the street corner watching. I taught TESOL for 4 years at GW. So I have some idea of what is involved in language acquisition, how people learn languages and how people don't learn languages. I got passing familiarity with the science of linguistics. So although the name of the program is Tall Tales, and I've invited people at the very beginning, from the very get-go, you always have the ability to call up and say, hey, Bob, you don't know what you're talking about. This time I do know what I'm talking about. In 2019, the University of Guam announced it received the National Science Foundation's Documenting Endangered Languages grant to document the Chamorro language used by first language speakers, which differs from speakers who learned it as a second language. Well, I suspect that there's quite a difference because the first language speakers will be speaking the language correctly. The second language speakers will be stumbling through it just like I do. According to Underwood, developing Chamorro language infrastructure, that is Gogwe Jan Chatalani Moana Ifinota, embrace and make way forward for our language, will formally document and create a repository for others to use in the future. This is really exciting stuff. When a language dies, the culture dies. And as fewer of our language, of our younger generation speak Chamorro, we should be worried about what this means for the future of our island. This is why it's gratifying and hopeful to see young people on Guam learning Chamorro, as well as all the projects, events, and individuals working to perpetuate the language. Well, I think it would be hopeful to see young people actually trying to learn Chamorro. Now, maybe I'm just not looking in the right places, but frankly, I don't see that happening. And I'll get into this a little bit more later on, but the projects and events and individuals working to perpetuate the language, I think in most cases are working at cross purposes with the preservation of the language. Now, let me just go talk a little bit about language in general and Chamorro language in particular. It is important that that the Chamorro language survive for a reason that's not readily apparent. I'm going to tell you about something that I learned way back in the 60s when I was studying linguistics, the relationship between language and the thought process. And one theory is, we didn't have computers back in those days, but this is a good way to describe it. Your brain is like a computer, and it has an operating system. And the operating system inside your brain is your mother tongue. So that operating system is going to treat the input that you put into that brain housing group, the sensory input, what you see, what you hear, what you say, most of all, what you think. And the operating system is different depending on what language you speak. And the example that I can still remember is the Hopi language, which is a language spoken by Indians who live out in Arizona, surrounded by the Navajo Nation. And if you were to take the Hopi language and talk about time, which is certainly one of the more important elements of culture, how we measure time, how we count time, how we deal with it, etc. People for whom English is the mother tongue think about time in a linear fashion. Are you going to go there? Are you going to go downtown today? No, maybe I'll go downtown next week. I went downtown last month. I see. Are you going to the States? Not this year, maybe next year. Straight line, right? If you were to ask a Hopi the same question, he would say, I'm not going downtown now, but when night has passed 3 times, I may go downtown. Quite a difference. In other words, the Hopi sees time as cyclical. The English speaker sees time as linear. Now, this is a gross oversimplification, but it has a much broader impact than what my feeble ability to describe it. So that operating system in your head is going to have an awful lot to do with your worldview. So if you really want to know, about Chamorro culture, and I always have to tell you that Chamorro culture doesn't mean the Hawaiian, Samoan, and New Zealand dances that Frank Rabone brought here in 1987 and introduced as cultural practices. And if time permitted, I would get into what I think cultural practices really are. But in order to thoroughly understand cultural practices, you got to have a handle on the language, because the reasons that I mentioned, that Whorfian hypothesis, explaining something in English may not come across the same way as if one were to explain it in Chamorro, regardless of what you're talking about. Even if you're talking about the innards of a pig, it would come out different. So I would say, yeah, it's really important that the Chamorro language not be lost, and we're losing it fast. And I've given my own suggestions as to how we could go about perpetuating the language. First suggestion is get the government out of it. Get the Chamorro Language Commission and whatever else it's called out of it. Because what we have here, we have the Chamorro industry. We have probably 100 people whose livelihood is dependent upon upon Chamorro. Chamorro this, that, or the other thing. The Department of Chamorro Affairs, the Chamorro Language Commission, etc. One of the members of the Chamorro Language Commission Laura Souter said, well, you know, the reason that we have to have this new orthography is because it's necessary to create nationhood. Well, create nationhood if you want to, and encourage young folks to learn the language if you want to. But I don't think you can do the same thing. I don't think you can do both at the same time. Now, I want to give you an example of what I think is counterproductive to the Chamorro establishment, like the Chamorro Language Commission. A tremendous opportunity for virtue signaling by giving people the opportunity to say, "Mas Chamorro zuke hagu." I'm more Chamorro than you are, right? Therefore, I'm more virtuous, right? So, now the latest initiative is to change the village names to Chamorro names. Yeah. And I've got a story here from the Daily News. Bills would change Santa Rita and Talafofo to Chamorro names. Senator Tello Taitagui recently introduced a measure to officially recognize Santa Rita and Talafofo in the Chamorro language. I wonder what's in Tello's purse. Do you know, Jose?
It's not the Ray and Bob resolution.
That's for darn sure. Yeah, I was going to call Ray Show and tell him that.
You didn't give your answer. That's
well,
right.
I couldn't because it's a personnel matter. Yeah, so maybe it's a bill to change the names of everything here on the island. So Tello wants to change the names of Santa Rita to and Talafofo so that Santa Rita would be Santa Rita, but the A would have a little circle over the top of it. And Talafofo would be, reading this in English now, T-A-L-O apostrophe, F-O apostrophe, F-O apostrophe. That's the way it would look to anyone who understands how to read English, because this little mark after a letter is called an apostrophe, correct? And the primary function of an apostrophe is to mark a possessive noun, as in Talafofo's mare, as an example. But when they put together the orthography, there was a recognition that there is a phoneme. Now, I'll try to explain what that means in a second. There is a phoneme in Chamorro that they have named the glotta. A linguist would tell you it's a glottal stop. So as an example of a glottal stop, if I were to say to in English, to, and I'm going to say it to aspirated and to wait a minute, maybe I'm going to use pet. I'll use final T, aspirated and unaspirated. Here it is. Pet, number one. Pet, number two. Is there a difference, Jose? Pet, pet.
You're stopping one vowel before you get to the T.
So in English, I would be using the phoneme T that has two allophones, pet and pet. But because it's an allophonic distinction, it doesn't change the meaning of the word. Now, in some languages, I think Thai, for example, the difference between aspirated and unaspirated is phonemic. It does change the meaning of a word. Oh, but not in English. Do you need to see a mark after the T to tell you that it's aspirated or unaspirated? No. Would this tend to make your reading just more burdensome and confusing? Well, that's where we are with the Chamorro orthography. For instance, Santa Rita, there are two phonemes that have what in English you would refer to as the A sound. A, and right? But as I demonstrated the last time I got off on this kick, English has almost a zero grapheme phoneme correlation. GHOTI in English can spell fish. The GH from enough, the O from women, the TI from education. So it's not necessary to be able to read a language to have all of these, what the correct word for are diacritical marks shown in the text. Standard English, when you're not talking foreign language, there are only 3 diacritical marks that you're going to see. You're going to see the NA, the little squiggly line over the N in language borrowed from Spanish, as in Agana. You're going to see the 2 dots referred to as an umlaut. Guess what language that comes from?
Swedish.
German.
Close.
But the umlaut. Yeah, but it's not used the same way in English as it is in German. In German, it affects pronunciation. In English, it is something that stands for undiphthongization. So if you look at some publications, I think Time Magazine, maybe the New York Times, cooperate is C-O with an umlaut, P-E-R-A-T. The umlaut means this is not a diphthong. So you don't pronounce it cooperate, you pronounce it cooperate. So that's the second diacritical mark we use. The third diacritical mark we use looks like an apostrophe, but it doesn't follow a letter. It's over a letter. So, for instance, if you see an E with something that looks like an apostrophe above it, that would be an example. And that occurs occasionally in English, but very seldom. Best example I can think of is the word expose. So some publications will print with that something that looks like an apostrophe above the E, not after the E, but above the E.
So we use context in the sentence to usually pronounce the word.
The pronunciation has little to do with the grapheme phoneme correspondence. You know, we've all seen these workups where you take a paragraph and you obliterate or blur about 3/4 of the words in the sentences, but not the first and last word, and you just read them right off because the letters just don't mean that much difference. So if the thinking behind that the Chamorro language establishment is using is, we'll put all the diacritical marks in there, this will help people learn how to pronounce the language, it's just wrong. You start out with a real heavy-duty unknown, trying to listen and repeat a sound, and that's how you learn a language. It's ears and mouth. It's not your eyes. So you start out with that, and then you throw another confusion in there with this cockamamie orthography that they've come up with. It just doesn't work out right. For instance, talafofo with that apostrophe after the final O. I'm looking at an article here, so it's F-O apostrophe period. Now, anybody who looks at that is wondering what's involved there when the final letter in a Chamorro word is the glotta, the final word in a sentence, then a period comes after it, and you've got an apostrophe and a period, but no S. So what's going on here? It tends only to be confusing. So if they were dead set on using a glotta in the orthography, they should have picked something that's more recognizable. Perhaps the letter X, which doesn't occur, and which they don't use in their orthography anyhow. It'd be much less confusing. So the way they want you to pronounce talafofo is not talafofo, like I always say it, but talafofo, right? Anai usafino tomorrow eleku talafofo. But very seldom do you hear people going through the whole march, right?
Did you say talu fofo?
Well, and that's another one because, Chamorro, we took Chamorro, Chamorro, a word that's been around forever, right? And we had to change the name of it. And this was, again, part of the nationalism. So instead of being O-R-O, double R-O, we have a new letter in the Chamorro orthography that sounds like this, ch, but it's written C-H with both letters capitalized. So once again, someone looking at that would say, both the first two letters of the word Chamorro are capitalized. Is that a typo? Is it a misprint? No, this is our Chamorro establishment putting something on us. And when you come to the U on the end, the phoneme at the end of the word has at least two allophones, O and U. It doesn't matter if you say Chamorro or Chamorro. The meaning is the same. So going through that drill, just so we can get a lot of earned media out of it, we can have commission meetings, we can look important, we can sound important, do a lot of virtue signaling. We're preserving the Chamorro language by changing telefofo to telefofo. Yeah. All right, let me take a short break here.
The Extra Point with Jerry Roberts of Guam Training.
Hi, I'm Jerry Roberts, and every day on The Ray Gibson Show, I get to comment on the incredibly diverse, fun, challenging, sometimes frustrating, often exciting, but always interesting world of work. I hope you'll be there with us.
You can find daily transcripts of The Extra Point at guamtraining.com. Tune in every weekday morning at 7:20 for The Extra Point with Jerry Roberts, brought to you by Guahan Insurance Services and First Hawaiian Bank on 93.3 The Point.
Today, this is Lieutenant Governor Josh Tenorio. You have an opportunity to make a difference, and it starts here at home. Cleanup projects, no matter the scale, help restore our island's beauty. Governor Liu and I invite our community to join us for the Guam Earth Month Island-wide Beautification Cleanup on Saturday, April 24th at 6 a.m. We all have a part in rebuilding a stronger, cleaner, greener Guam. Call 473-1162 for more details.
Now, back to Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie, the one radio show politicians don't want you to listen to. Call now, 888-TALK. That's 888-8255.
We've got Nate horning in here on Facebook. He got a couple of pretty good comments. Back to the earth-shaking question. What's in Tello's purse? Nate horns in and says the name of the driver of the red sheep is what's in Tello's purse. That's why she won't let anyone see inside. And he also points out that the word resume has a sky comma above the E. And he's right on that. So I think I made my point concerning all the diacritical marks and why it's important that the Chamorro language survive. Whether you speak Chamorro or you don't speak Chamorro, it's a valuable tool that we can all benefit from. Now, I want to go once more through my approach to how the language could be preserved. And then I'm not going to repeat myself. I'm just going to go to the caller on line one. So language is sound. It's listening, it's hearing and repeating. Language is not a logical undertaking. It's not sitting down and learning a bunch of rules and then using those rules to make sounds with your mouth. It's not how it works. Language is a set of habits, and those habits are developing by hearing and saying. And I pointed out before, I never had to learn English. I got it for nothing. Like everyone gets their mother tongue for free. You don't have to learn your mother tongue. You learn it as an infant and as part of the growing up process. And people fortunate enough to live in homes that are multilingual can have mother tongue competence in more than one language. The younger you are, the easier it is to glom on to a language. Kids under 11 can learn languages very easily. So we need to keep that into consideration when we're talking about the Chamorro language. My way of going about doing it would be to take some of the Manamco who have the gift of the language, giving them distinctive badges, giving them a couple hours worth of training in how to get started on teaching someone another language, turn them loose in the community along with an advertising campaign that said, Zamo fino Chamorro, Faishin ni tauto no guaha edzi tag I kamasola, you know? So you would be encouraged to go up to these guys that have these badges on and try to speak Chamorro with them. Because I remember in my beginning days, it was really hard to find anybody who would take the time to say, "No, Bob, this way," or say it, I'll say it, Bob, and you say it after me. One of the problems is that English speakers are very accustomed to people who speak English as a second language and make a lot of second language errors. We just don't pay any attention to it. We try to figure out what is meant and go with it from there. There are very few people who speak Chamorro as a second language. So everyone that you hear is a native speaker. So when someone comes along and says something, tries to say something in Chamorro that doesn't fit, there's very little effort to bring that person back around. You draw a lot of chuckles that way, of course, which for some people that may be the end of the process. But if we had these signers out there with these badges on who could be resources for the entire community, I think we'd be going a long way towards where we need to go. The first thing we need to do is get the Chamorro establishment out of it, get the government out of it. The second thing we need to do is try to start developing what I call Betty O'Briens. Betty O'Brien taught Spanish at Elkhorn High School. I think Betty's entire Spanish background consisted of probably 4 years at the university and 2 trips to Tijuana, and that was it. But she could speak Spanish, and kids could learn Spanish from her, and it worked out pretty well. But we're not developing any, as far as I know, we're not developing any Betty O'Briens here, and I don't think we're making any effort to develop Betty O'Briens. We're taking the older folks who got Chamorro for nothing, like I did, and we're saying, these are Chamorro teachers. At the program, notwithstanding that we're spending a lot of time and money on it, has been a gigantic failure. What we need to do is start developing the Betty O'Briens. Take people, in their younger years who don't speak Chamorro or don't speak much Chamorro, and start bringing them along to become the future Chamorro teachers. Because if we don't, all of the people that could teach are going to be dead. The next thing is junk this whole idea of this new orthography and go back to what we had before. Go back to the old Spanish orthography. Everybody knew what it was. All of our Hispanic derivative names use that orthography. It's not an unknown. The rules have been understood for a long, long time. Instead of wasting a lot of time and effort on something that's as counterproductive as this changing the name of Telefofo by putting 3 diacritical marks in it and saying, this is how you have to spell Telefofo from now on. So I just wanted to get that off my chest. Sorry, Daily News. You just missed the mark here, because Cooper and his wife are raising their children to speak Chamorro means that Cooper and his wife are raising the children to speak Chamorro. I don't think you can draw much more meaning out of it than that. Okay, I'm not going to repeat here. I'm going to go straight to line one. Good afternoon, Pete.
Good afternoon, Uncle Bob. You know, I've often lamented that we went from Chamorros who were embarrassed that they couldn't speak English well to Chamorros who are now embarrassed that can't speak Chamorro well. You know, and you're absolutely right. I learned from being raised by my grandparents and having my great-grandparents in the house, and that's all they spoke. And so when I went to school at the University of Guam and my classmates were taking Chamorro class, they would always seek me out. And then they would give me their homework to look at, and they had all these linguistic terms like you're talking about. I'm telling you, I thought I was reading a foreign language because that's not how Chamorro should be taught, and that's not how Chamorro, gets preserved. But the orthography, like you were talking about, I agree that the orthography is messed up, but it does serve some utility. Like the two words Malago and Malagu could be spelled the same way, but you wouldn't know. And the difference in the syllable, the first syllable changes the definition completely. So Malago means to want, and Malago means to run. So the little, I guess they call it lonat on top of the A in the front is the distinctive marker, but they've overdone it with the orthography, and they made it more complicated than it actually needs to. There is some need for some specific orthography for Chamorro, and I know that when they were developing the orthography, they were trying to follow the one sound, one symbol system.
That's referred to as grapheme phoneme correspondence, Phil.
Right, exactly. All those technical terms that you're talking about, those totally confused the heck out of me when I was already a university student and these guys were coming and, I just had no idea what they were talking about, transitory, transitive, all these other things. And what I did learn was that Chamorro, or in learning any language, right, you should take the descriptive approach versus the prescriptive approach. What you're talking about, how Chamorro is being taught, is more of the prescriptive. There's a bunch of rules that you learn and say, hey, here, go speak the language now. But the descriptive approach is learning by doing and then figuring out that, hey, this is how you talk, this is how you speak, this is what it means. And there you can glean some rules from learning that way, but there's always exceptions to the rule. But the problem is that the prescriptive approach has been used, and then you get all these people that speak Chamorro that sounds total gibberish to the native speakers, and then they get laughed at, and then they complain that, why are you guys laughing at me? I'm trying, right? But Chamorros love to laugh, and when you say something that is ridiculous, they're going to laugh at you,
Yeah.
And so I criticized a lot of, I criticized, a lot of folks, hey, I don't know what you're trying to say, but it sounds crazy. And then I get, a lot of negative comments saying, instead of trying to help you, you're criticizing folks. But my whole point in criticizing folks, like you said, nobody wants to correct you, right? Well, I'm trying to correct folks because I feel it's a responsibility that if you're going to teach the language, you have to teach it correctly, right? Not just, you don't learn how to play football by reading a book and then heading out to the field, right? And then when you see them screwing everything up, you got to correct them. But, that's the problem, is they don't want to be corrected. So,
well,
anyways, that's my 2 cents.
The Chamorro language establishment is too deeply invested in the approach that they're using. So, they, regardless of whether it works or not, is not the real point. And going back to Malago and Malago, ordinarily you'd pick that up from the context. But if you were to teach someone Chamorro, you would put those two words in what's called a substitution drill, so that you substitute those words in a sentence, and by doing that, the person learns how it sounds and learns how it works. But to put the
but if you were just doing like a definition test, or what do you call those tests where you have to define the words, you wouldn't be able to differentiate it if it was just on its own with no context.
Well, then, if there's no context, then there's hardly any reason to define it. If you go along with my theory that that language is sound. And when you first mentioned the test, my first thought was maybe you were talking about a true or Fauci test. But I guess not.
I like that one.
I guess that's just for medicine, true or Fauci, right? Yeah, but Pete, you and I think, are pretty close together here on this. The best way to learn a language is to hear it and speak it. And the best teachers of a language, native speakers are the best teachers of a language. There's no getting around that. So we have a wasting asset that we're not taking advantage of because we're wasting too much time on what I think are silly orthography type undertakings instead of concentrating on what's really important.
Uncle Bob, I've met a handful of folks that speak Chamorro, flawlessly, I would say, that are not Chamorro and learned it as adults, and none of those people took classes. Mm-hmm. Those people learned it by being in with other Chamorros, learning it by living it, by being in the culture. None of the ones that I know that have gotten it right took a class.
I agree.
All right. Thanks, Uncle Bob.
Good talking to you, Pete. Okay, let's take a short break here, and we'll come back to spend a little time on PDN today. We'll come back to the Post.
Mezcla Chamorro Fusion Bistro in Tumon is back with all your mezcla favorites, like oxtail kadu, Kahlua pig and cabbage, and Chef Peter's style black stew frittata. Mezcla is ready to welcome back everyone with great service in a safe and friendly environment. Come on down and visit Mezcla Chamorro Fusion Bistro in Tumon, located on the first floor lobby of the Grand Plaza Hotel. Open for lunch from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. and for dinner from 5:30 p.m. to 9 p.m. Call 969-2652 for reservations. Mezcla, a true taste of Guam.
Hey, big news! Now you can listen to The Point on radio.com. And radio.com gives you so much more. Local news stations give you what's going on in your community. Get national news from CBS, CNN, or Fox News Radio. Take a break with one of the hundreds of music, sports, and talk stations. Love podcasts? Radio.com has thousands of true crime, comedy, kids and family podcasts, and more. Listen anytime, anywhere. On your PC, smart speakers, and a variety of connected devices. Or download the Radio.com app now from the App Store or Google Play.
So there we are, back with the Post. I see Early Supper Jack on the line, but let me finish up the Post. Early Supper Jack. No, I'm sorry, Drive-Through Jack. It's just a little early today, and we'll get to you then. Discussions about spending priorities for $664 million should stay open. At the rate proposals are being made on how to spend the $664 million in direct pandemic assistance from the federal government to the government of Guam, the amount might get depleted sooner when GovGuam can recover from diminished revenue collections. When the island's tourist industry tanked, it wiped out the on-island spending of more than 1.5 million tourists in a year. That was $1.38 billion lost to the local economy. GovGuam expects to receive $664 million from the Biden administration's American Rescue Plan. The local government is waiting for further guidance on what rules or strings will be attached to this pot of money. GovGuam has 2 years to spend the money before it expires, so there's no need to proceed with haste on how the money should be spent. While Governor Leon Guerrero's administration is waiting for the guidelines, There is already a growing list of wants and wishes for this money. The governor wants to use this funding source to kickstart development of a new public hospital and health center. This alone could take $300 million bite out of the total, which means if this will get the federal government's okay, just a little more than half will remain. But there are more, quote, wants, plans, and proposals for this money. More recently, the judiciary has expressed hope it would get help out of the $664 million to stave off reduced work weeks and possibly fund pay raises for its personnel. That's where I want to see it go. The Guam Economic Development Authority is seeking $37.8 million to help more pandemic-hit small businesses. The Visitors Bureau wants $18 million for Matapang Beach. Certain senators have urged the governor to use this funding source to pay out the local law called the RISE Act. The list goes on. The governor wants to meet with senators to discuss your priorities and ideas to rebuild a stronger Guam and work together to incorporate them into a comprehensive summary once federal guidance is received. Prior to this meeting, the governor is asking senators to send a list of collective priorities by April 30. It's encouraging to see this gesture of openness. Well, is it really necessary? Because the governor said, we are transparent and accountable to the people. We are transparent with reports, meetings, and minutes. As far as I'm concerned, we're following everything we're required to. Yeah, right. Yeah. Okay, so far as I'm concerned, this is another pretty much of a nothing editorial. It is not much more than a news report that the governor has asked the senators to submit a list. So let's see, 4:52. I'm going to take a short break, and then we'll. No, I don't need to take a break. Okay, we'll go straight to McDonald's drive-through then and entertain Drive-Through Jack.
Well, I guess I gotta wait for the theme to go through.
Go ahead, Drive-Through Jack.
Good afternoon there, Bob. Yeah, there's always it's deja vu when it comes to the Chamorro language, and I would probably use the translation in Chamorro, but I'm afraid Robert Underwood might want to name a village after it, so I'll stick with the French part and just call it deja vu.
All right.
But I always thought English was the hardest language. I don't know. Are we talking about English as a second language? Or are we talking about bilingual? If I didn't speak Chamorro at the table, I didn't get to eat. So, go to a novena. You went to a novena at least once a week. You learned the native language. Say prayers. Go to Rosary, Fatima Rosary. Go to church. The language was pretty much taught at certain hours. I really have problems with what they're doing now. I think it's just people trying to get recognition. Doesn't solve the problem about the Chamorro language. There's a big problem that people seem to skip. Like it's no problem that Chamorro is supposed to be a spoken language. It's not a written language.
No language is a written language, Jack. That's my point. Languages are sound, and sometimes people take the effort to write those sounds down in various forms of systems. But language is sound. It's not marks on a piece of paper.
But I do agree that having a written language, it educates the people. But if it's not concise, it's not concise now. It's Romanization of a language that isn't even written. Yes. So, there's a bunch of problems. It's supposed to be spoken. Pictures, spokens, and actions. And it's just really confusing now what they're trying to do. You could put as many symbols you want down at the Guam legislature, and you could Romanize it all you want, but nobody really reads it. It doesn't do anybody any service. It is. It's supposed to be spoken. You're supposed to have images. It's supposed to have some sort of fluid transition from thought to speech, and it just doesn't cut it for whatever they're trying to do. And when they bring up the argument that, well, it was a smooth transition from Hagana to Agana, and it says, what transition? Everybody that was concerned about the Hagana to Agana transition were worried about their mail. And the post office came out and says, well, you can put whatever verbiage you want there just as long as the numbers are correct, the zip code. Because that's what they go by, the zip code. So, I don't know what they're talking about. I'm still getting mail marked with Agana on it. I get some that have Agana on it, but it goes to my box because the post office recognizes the zip code.
They could put McDonald's on it, and if it had your zip code, you'd still get it, Jack.
Exactly. So
you might have to get it with your dinner, but you'd still get it.
Exactly. So, I applaud you for trying to speak Chamorro. Sometimes it hurts my ears, but I'm not complaining. I am fluent in Chamorro. I don't use it that much. I use it a lot when I get like 3 or 4 beers on me. But, it's not that I'm comfortable at it. It's just that somehow I feel like I'm selling something short, something like I'm prostituting my own culture when I try to get other people to use it. I want to be a wind talker. I want it to be when push comes to shove, and the nation needs somebody that they can rely on to get a message from one place to another place. I want to be the most protected man on the field.
Jack, I think if that happened, they'd send you straight to the mess hall.
Exactly. And I would know what to cook.
Yeah. Okay, Jack. Well, thanks for adding into the conversation.
All right.
Okay, so, in regards to what Jack said about, my Chamorro, I always come back with, it's better than nothing. And Elwin Champaco chimes in here and I think makes a really great comment. Elwin Champaco Quitano says, if Bob speaks broken Chamorro for 2 more years on the radio, a new orthography needs to be invented. Let's give Elwin Champaco Quitano a big hand, Jose. Yeah, maybe we'll present him something present him with a plaque during halftime or something like that. Is it halftime yet?
It's almost. I like that we get Jacked Up Jack to speak Chamorro.
Yeah. Yeah, when the Spanish wrote the island's name Guam, they only spelled it as Guahan. The H was silent and now misinterpreted as aspirated. That's with hundreds of other words as well, and Americans messed it up considerably with Guam. Yeah, that's very true. However, a rose by any other name would still smell as sweet. Okay, it's not halftime yet. There we go. All right.
The Point is KUSG, Hagåtña, Guam, 93.3 FM and 104.3 HD3.
Minneapolis calm. I'm Jack Callahan, Fox News. In the wake of the guilty verdicts in the Derek Chauvin murder trial,
there were a lot of street celebrations, particularly in the area of 38th and Chicago, the area now known as George Floyd Square. But there was gunfire in that area, now confirmed by the police. 2 suspects are on the run. No information about anyone being shot. Derek Chauvin was found to be guilty. As the verdict was read, Chauvin did not react. He looked around a little bit, but did not look at the jury. He surrendered his hands to be handcuffed when it came time to be led out of the courtroom. He is currently in the same maximum security facility where he was held until he made bail. He's got 8 weeks until sentencing.
Fox's Mike Tobin, George Floyd's nephew Brandon Williams, calling for more prosecutions.
We need each and every officer to be held accountable. And until then, it's still scary to be a black man and woman in America encountering police.
President Biden reacting with a call for police reform.
As they saw in this trial from the fellow police officers who testified, most men and women who wear the badge serve their communities honorably. But those few who fail to meet that standard must be held accountable.
Chauvin faces decades in prison. His attorney is planning an appeal. Shortly before the Chauvin verdict was announced, there was a police shooting in Columbus, Ohio. Officers killing a 15-year-old girl armed with a knife as she lunged at someone with it. Acting Columbus Police Chief Michael Woods.
The Bureau of Criminal Investigation is conducting the criminal investigation into this incident. At the conclusion of that investigation, the Division of Police will conduct an administrative review of the actions of this officer and all officers at scene.
The shooting drew hundreds of protesters to the streets outside Columbus Police Headquarters. America is listening to Fox News.
The vaccine is officially here, and we aren't just talking about the COVID vaccine, but a financial vaccine at Bank Pacific. We may not be doctors, but we can help you with your financial health. Whether to take advantage of today's crazy low rates, or just a local bank that has your back. At Bank Pacific, we want to help make 2021 your best year yet. Because for 66 years, where others put branches, we place roots, and we're rooting for you. Equal housing lender, member FDIC.
Half a day. Patsy Gogri from Security Title with a real estate tip. A power of attorney can be a useful tool when a buyer or seller cannot be present to sign documents, such as a military member deployed overseas. To mitigate its fraudulent use, your escrow officer will contact the seller to make sure they know their property is being sold. When using a power of attorney, call the professionals at Security Title. We are here to help.
A state of emergency has been declared at Arizona's southern border.
Governor Doug Ducey is deploying the Arizona National Guard to the region to support the local law enforcement.
Citizens in our border communities are concerned for their safety, and nonprofits left to pick up the pieces of broken federal policies are strained.
Ducey says the National Guard will assist with medical care in detention centers and help authorities track child smuggling. Ducey pointed his finger at the Biden administration.
It doesn't look like this administration is going to act anytime soon, and we're not going to sit around and wait any longer.
The White House says it wants to find out the root cause of why people are migrating. Rob Dawson, Fox News.
President Biden will reportedly tell an online climate summit meeting of world leaders starting tomorrow. He's committing the U.S. to cut in half its greenhouse gas emissions in less than 10 years. A union representing coal miners says they could get on board with a green jobs initiative as long as they get the jobs.
United Mine Workers of America President Cecil Roberts told the press club this week that 7,000 coal miners lost their jobs last year and 40,000 have over the past decade as coal plants continue to close. Roberts and the union have put forth a plan that calls for out-of-work miners to be first in line to get any new green jobs.
People lost their pensions, lost their health care, lost their jobs, lost their wages, lost their ability to provide for their families. That's the way we deal currently with transition. We need something much better than that.
He argued that we should be using carbon capture and sequestration technology and allow coal jobs to continue to exist, arguing that China is already investing heavily in that kind of tech. Jessica Rosenthal, Fox News.
Coronavirus cases in the United States lower Thursday, just over 54,000, while deaths blamed on the virus were higher from the day before, with 767 reported. I'm Jack Callahan. This is Fox News.
Sunday brunch at Mezcla Bistro in Hagatna is back.
Come and enjoy Mezcla's true taste of Guam.
At only $28.95, enjoy your Sunday with your friends and family with their free-flowing house mimosa or house draft beer. Open for 2 seatings at 10:30 a.m. and 12:30 p.m.
Let Mezcla serve up your favorite local foods. Call them at 479-2652
or 479-2653 to book a reservation. Limited seating available.
Mezcla reminds everyone to be safe and stay sanitized. Sunday brunch at Mezcla, a true taste of Guam.
When's the last time you looked at your homeowner's insurance?
We buy a homeowner's policy and never give it another thought until something happens. Life brings changes, and our coverage needs can change. The smart thing to do is get the answers and level up our insurance to make sure we're totally protected.
That's the Insurance Extra Point. Get out there and make something good happen today by calling Guahan Insurance Services at 475-1162 or visit us at the Camacho Landmark Center in Tamuning.
Hapaday, this is Lieutenant Governor Josh Tenorio. Earth Month is a global movement, and it starts here at home. From Jigo to Inalahan and everywhere in between, cleanup projects, no matter the scale, help restore our island's beauty. Let's reconnect with our island and join us for the Guam Earth Month Island-wide Beautification Cleanup on Saturday, April 24th at 6 a.m. We all have a part in rebuilding a stronger, cleaner, greener Guam. Call 473-1162 for more details.
Okay, so here we are back on the Tall Tales after that big halftime show. This is the second half of Tall Tales. I had a chance to peek at the Facebook comments here, and here's Elwin Champaco Gaetano again. The higher learning establishments continues to invent and reinvent nonsense about what should be indigenous. Chamorro is a Spanish borrowed term and was never meant to describe the indigenous, but rather a neo-Hispanic culture. I've heard Robert Underwood say the same thing. Robert Underwood said that the word Chamorro didn't appear in conversations on the island until about 1825. Yeah, not in the 1700s. But after the pre-Hispanic indigenes had ample opportunity to mix with the invaders from other parts of the world, did the word Chamorro come along. But once again, this would be anathema to the Chamorro establishment, which is so deeply invested in that particular approach to the language, the culture, etc. And one comes back and he says, we'll call Bob's new local language Babarias. That's just a Chamorro word itself. Yeah, and then Rob Hawk says he only speaks Spanish at Taco Bell. Let's see if there's anything else I need to comment here on here. And then talking about Hagatnya, Nate horns in with a question, and Peter Santos comes back and says, Hagatuna is tuna blood. So I guess I kind of set something off there. I'm kind of glad I did. Something worth talking about, especially with respect to the Chamorro language establishment. One of the things that I didn't mention, it's part of my program, is that rather than hire a bunch of separatists and put them on the language commission, my sense is we needed to get a hold of some people who are good at molding opinions, public relations types, and try to figure out how to come up with a campaign to convince young people, teenagers and 20-somethings that speaking Chamorro is really cool. Because if we could do that, we'd be well on our way. Okay, let's go to the card. I've talked so much about Steve on so many days, I'm just going to leave Steve out of it. Well, I guess that's right.
So is he.
Yeah, Steve's out of it. Okay. So then we go on to, we've got to talk about the Chauvin verdict that came down this morning. And I have to say, Robert Underwood, I think, got it right. And then I got to talk about adoptions and the fact that Mary Torres has an odd approach to the administrative adjudication law. And if I haven't said this before, I'm going to say with respect to the military buildup, Sabina Paris is all wet. Yeah. And I have some pretty interesting stuff on those points. So let's start out with Guam leaders welcome Chauvin guilty verdict. Welcome the guilty verdict. Yeah, so although Robert may be on the right side of it, this is PNC. Guam leaders reacted positively to the guilty verdict handed down in the Derek Chauvin case. The former police officer was found guilty on all 3 counts in the death of George Floyd. Governor Lilian Guerrero said she echoes the sentiments of leaders across the nation. How appropriate. This verdict holds Derek Chauvin accountable for his actions, but there is no justice in a system that allows and too often excuses police brutality against people of color, especially the black community. The outcome of the trial will not bring back George Floyd and will not end systemic racism. Good going, Governor. Systemic racism. You know, if you're not white, you just don't have a chance. You could never hold a high office in... Wait a minute. Yeah. But today we exhale, we mourn, and we continue to fight. Where's the real Joe Cruz when we really need him? We continue. What exactly are you fighting for, Governor Leon Guerrero?
Attention.
Gee, you know, okay, I'll if you're listening down there at Adelup, I'd like you to all kind of line up, fall in, cover down, and then I'm going to give a command. Ready, virtue signal. Very good, Governor, very good. Nice virtue signaling. Former Guam Congressman Robert Underwood, in an interview with K57's Patty Arroyo, said that while there's a sense of relief that the country is not going to have massive riots or protests, there's also the sense that justice has been served. And I'll come back to the sense of relief about the riots and protests in a second. And then Robert goes on to say, and that's a little bit more important, I believe. I believe that we have seen there is application of the rule of law. That the rule of law applies to law enforcement as much as it applies to the general community. And that's really an important feature of this, of course, throughout our lives. He added, the victory here should be for the rule of law. That, you know, people don't get a break just because they have a badge. they're supposed to pay attention to the law. I agree 100%. A lot of times I don't agree with Robert, but, you know, all of you systemic racers out there, how is it that Derek Chauvin, who's as white as the driven snow, took a heavy rap here? Derek Chauvin, the sentence for second-degree murder is 40 years. That's the potential sentence. The sentencing guidelines call for 12 and a half years. But, you know, if he isn't sentenced to something more than the guidelines, then we're back to what Robert says, a sense of relief the country is not going to have to go through massive riots and protests. So I've talked about justice here more often than not, and justice can't be gauged by the result that the system reaches, but how well it apparently functions. And it apparently functioned very well in this particular case. Chauvin was arrested, he was indicted, there was an amendment to the indictment, an amendment to the amendment. He went on for trial. He had a jury of his peers, although there were more African Americans on the jury than there were non-African Americans. And from the accounts that I was able to ferret out of the very biased news media, he got a fair trial. I thought that my own analysis was that there was enough reasonable doubt to cause at least a mistrial, but that I'm going to come back to the first part of Robert's comment here in just a second and see how much bearing that had on it. Now we have President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris reacted to the verdict in an address from the White House, and I read both addresses, and it's very disappointing. I'm not going to use the word disgusting, but it comes pretty close. They both commended the witnesses who testified, including police officers. Men and women who wear the badge serve their communities honorably. Those who fail to meet that standard must be held accountable, and they were today. One was, Biden said. No one should be above the law, and today's verdict sends that message. All right, if you could just shut up there, you would have been okay. But that's not enough. We can't stop here. In order to deliver a real change in reform, we can and must do more to reduce the likelihood that tragedy like this will never happen to occur again. Harris called the verdict a step forward in law enforcement reform. And then she said, a measure of justice isn't the same thing as equal justice. We still have work to do. Yeah. So if you read the complete statements, both of them get about a paragraph into their statements, and they've got to use the phrase systemic racism. We've got systemic racism in this country.
I talked to you before the show about this. There were two other occupants in that car with George Floyd, who happened also to be African American. If this was systemic, they too would have been either injured, dead, or probably something adverse happened to them.
Yeah. Well, in my workup yesterday of the 4 different forms of reaching verdicts in a case like this, you know, you start out with the optics, the optics approach, and then we go on to the critical race theory approach, and then the social justice approach. And finally, we get down to the one that was used in this particular case, which I'd have to say I'm satisfied with. You know, it looked to me like the system worked like it's supposed to. And I don't think it's necessary to go on this critical race theory, anti-racism approach every time anything like this happens. We had a shooting in Kenosha here 2 days ago, you know. Have you heard anything more about it? Well, I subscribed to the Milwaukee Journal, and the Milwaukee Journal ran some pictures. And they ran a picture of the shooter. Yeah. You're not going to read about this in the mainstream media. The shooter, the guy that killed 3 people and wounded 3 more, was an African American, but you're not going to see that in the mainstream media.
Because he was a shooter.
Because he was a shooter. If it had been a white shooter and any of the victims had been African Americans, white supremacism breaks out again in Kenosha, right? So I did want to unpack this a little bit. First of all, folks are going to wonder, well, what happens next? Well, Chauvin is going to be sentenced in 8 weeks. And his bail was revoked and he was taken into custody immediately after the trial. What will happen sooner or later, his attorney will make a motion for modification of the conditions of release, asking that he be released on bail or some other term. And when you stop to think about it, you know, the purpose of bail is to make sure that a person shows up for trial and to protect the public from that person. The chances of Chauvin even getting a parking ticket after this, I think, are somewhere between slim and none. He will be the most law-abiding person you've ever seen. And the right size cash bail would be more than enough to keep him from fleeing the jurisdiction to avoid sentencing. Do you think the judge will modify the conditions of the bail? Let's go back to what Robert Underwood said. There's a sense of relief that the country is not going to have massive riots or protests. If the conditions of release were modified so that he could be released on bail, we know what would happen, right? I want to just go briefly to the New York Times. The New York Times came out with, you know, their lead story right after the verdict was yeah, it doesn't say I didn't get the right one, I guess. The lead story in the New York Times was that the verdict would bring a sense of catharsis, if you understand the word catharsis. Catharsis meaning a restoration of a sense of well-being. You know, that, well, it's over. For me, it's over, and I think justice was done. But I'm this odd duck that doesn't judge justice based only on the results. But I don't think any catharsis will come out of this whatsoever. What I see here is a training module, and that is that if you subscribe to identity politics and you want things to go your way, the only 3 things you must do: riot, loot, and arson. And if you do that, then things will go your way. And all of the accounts of the trial here mention, gosh, how much of an influence is that going to have on these jurors from Minneapolis? The fact that, if they don't bring in a guilty verdict, maybe even on second-degree murder, that the city will go up in flames again, and people are thinking, are the jurors thinking, geez, I don't want to have to live with that. Or the single holdout, if he becomes identified as the one that caused the hung jury. The guy that caused the hung jury might find himself hung himself from the nearest sour apple tree. So I'm afraid that this whole drill is only going to provide an incentive for more looting, rioting, and arson. Because, after the one in Brooklyn Heights, the same night, people were breaking into department stores, new shoes, new clothes, and things like that.
Maybe they're doing step number 4, buying a large multi-million-dollar house.
Yeah, right. Yeah, like Patrice Cullors.
After all the looting.
Yeah. So our president, who we could expect, no, we can't expect. We have in the past expected presidents to be statesmen. I think the chances of that ever happening again are somewhere between slim and none. What our president could have said was something like, justice, the court has reached its verdict, justice has been done. The strength of our country is that we have an impartial justice system. Goodbye. Full stop. And Kamala Harris, Kamala Harris is a fine one to be talking about systemic racism. If it weren't for systemic racism, she would not be vice president of the United States. Joe Biden made that very, very clear. So, I have a column here from Jonathan Turley that I'm going to read into the record dealing with how the trial was reported. I previously wrote a column warning that media coverage of the George Floyd trial of Derek Chauvin was dangerously incomplete and slanted. The concern was that the public was not being informed of strong defense arguments that could be used at the trial. The danger is that any acquittal or hung jury would then come as an even greater surprise, contributing to more rioting and violence. The coverage of the final day of the trial only magnified those concerns, as legal experts and journalists seem more set on advocating than reporting on the underlying issues. Those concerns were evident within minutes of the defense starting its closing argument. Defense attorney Eric Nelson did a remarkably good job in defending his client. However, CNN's senior legal analyst Laura Coates declared, defense begins the closing by defining reasonable doubt, not with why Derek Chauvin is innocent. Think about that. And Turley, who's an ace criminal law defense attorney himself, says many of us did, quote, think about that, particularly those of us who were criminal defense lawyers. My guess is that over 90% of defense arguments begin with the defining reasonable doubt, since that is the framing standard for jury decision. It's the virtual mantra of the defense. We start by reminding the jury of its burden, particularly after a prosecutor has given a more fluid understanding of that standard. The last thing you want to do as a criminal defense attorney is to suggest that the jury should focus on whether a defendant is innocent. Trial tactics. You don't have to prove that he's innocent. All you got to do is show that the state didn't prove its case. The burden is on the prosecutor to prove that he's guilty. The defense does not have to prove a thing for acquittal. As emphasized by Judge Peter Cahill and all American judges, the jury must focus on the burden of proof shouldered by the prosecution. The defendant is presumed innocent, at least outside of CNN. Another such moment arose with PBS NewsHour. This is public broadcasting, the state media, right? Correspondent Yamiche Alcindor, who has been repeatedly criticized for bias in her coverage during the Trump administration, the riots, and the Biden administration, including referring to Biden appointees as virtual superheroes. Alcindor also defended Maxine Waters after her inflammatory call for protesters to get more confrontational and not accept an acquittal verdict. As with Coates, Alcindor went on attack with the minute the defense rose to make its closing argument. Alcindor declared, Chauvin's lawyer said it flies in the face of common sense to say Floyd's death was not caused at least in part by his underlying conditions or drug use. This argument is in direct contradiction to the prosecution's case, which says, believe your eyes. Quote, Chauvin's knees killed Floyd. Direct contradiction to the prosecution. How dare Nelson do it? So Turley goes on to say, the statement is so bizarre that it's breathtaking. Alcindor appears aggrieved that the defense had the temerity to directly contradict the prosecution on the question of guilt. The coverage was striking in the glowing accounts of the prosecution's closing arguments as opposed to the criticism of the defense. More importantly, the coverage shows little concern over the rights of criminal defense or appreciation for the position of defense counsel. We saw the same trend during the Trump administration when legal experts adopted ridiculously broad interpretations of criminal provisions in a blind obsession to find a way to charge Donald Trump or his family. Some of us from the defense bar warned how dangerous such interpretations would be and how they ignored both the element and controlling case law. Legal experts dismissed abuses disclosed in prior investigations involving defendants like Michael Flynn and Carter Page. They disregarded the implications of sweeping definitions of crimes like obstruction or the Logan Act. They defended judicial bias when it worked against Trump officials. The saddest aspect of this trend is that legal analysis was once largely immune from such bias. I have worked as a television legal analyst for 30 years on various networks. I have watched as legal analysts in both television and print have become part of the echo journalism model, offering reassuring analysis for viewers who want continual affirmation of their own political preferences. We have now lost any semblance of objectivity or neutrality. That is consistent with the trend in journalism at large, where there are growing calls for advocacy in journalism. This includes academics rejecting the concept of objectivity in journalism in favor of advocacy. Even journalism dean and New Yorker writer Steve Call denounced how the First Amendment right to freedom of speech was being, quote, weaponized to protect disinformation. The result, however, has been the steady decline in the trust for the media. The cost of such bias is often ignored. However, the failure to inform the public of the countervailing arguments in trials, like the trial of Eric Chauvin, fuels our social divisions and ongoing violence in our cities. I agree. So as I was going through this, Chauvin will be sentenced in 8 weeks. And once again, if the judge follows the sentencing guidelines, it'll be 12 and a half years when the max is actually 40. So let me go to Wrigley Field and see what the temper of the folks in Wrigley Field is.
The Extra Point with Jerry Roberts of Guam Training.
Hi, I'm Jerry Roberts, and every day on The Ray Gibson Show, I get to comment on the incredibly diverse, fun, challenging, sometimes frustrating, often exciting, but always interesting world of work. I hope you'll be there with us.
You can find daily transcripts of The Extra Point at GuamTraining.com. Tune in every weekday morning at 7:20 for The Extra Point with Jerry Roberts. Brought to you by Guahan Insurance Services and First Hawaiian Bank on 93.3 The Point.
Today, this is Lieutenant Governor Josh Tenorio. Earth Month is a global movement, and it starts here at home. From Jigo to Inalahan and everywhere in between, cleanup projects, no matter the scale, help restore our island's beauty. Let's reconnect with our island and join us for the Guam Earth Month Island-wide Beautification Cleanup on Saturday, April 24th at 6 a.m. We all have a part in rebuilding a stronger, cleaner, greener Guam. Call 473-1162 for more details.
Okay, so here we are in Wrigley Field, Chicago, Illinois, as though there's more than one Chicago. This one's in Illinois.
Chicago Heights.
Yeah, and seventh inning stretch. That means there's 2 more innings left here in Tall Tales for this Wednesday afternoon, and I'm still talking about the verdict in the trial of Derek Chauvin. Starting out once again with, I'm satisfied with the verdict. The system worked the way it's supposed to work. He had advantage of the Sixth Amendment's right to jury trial, just like any other criminal defendant. And the verdict is what the verdict is. I thought that there would be, in my analysis of the evidence that I had to dig out, one of the things that Turley didn't mention was that the mainstream media gave thorough reports of the directed examination of the witnesses, but sketchy at best examination of the testimony of the witnesses on cross-examination, which is pretty important. So my analysis was I thought there would be enough reasonable doubt for at least a mistrial. There wasn't. Jury came in, murder 2. That's the way the system works. Next thing I think you can expect to see will be counsel moving for change of conditions of release for Chauvin, which the judge more than likely will deny, because the judge doesn't want to see more looting, rioting, and arson either. After the sentence, if the mob is dissatisfied with the sentence, we'll be right back to what Robert Underwood mentioned. Sense of relief that the country is not going to have massive riots or protests. Well, I project that if the mob is not satisfied with the sentence, that if it's not long enough, there will be more rioting, not protesting, just rioting. Let's call a spade here. And after he's sentenced, then an appeal will lie, and of course, Attorney Nelson will file an appeal on behalf of Chauvin, and I detect that there will be some reversible error that he will zoom in on. One of them was vaguely reported in the statement of one of the witnesses who was called as a rebuttal witness and made a rather damaging admission. And then I think the soundest basis for appeal is that Judge Cahill denied Chauvin's motion for a change of venue. And his basis was, well, as much publicity as this case has had, maybe no place else would be any better. I don't think that's the reason that you deny a motion for change of venue. You examine the possibility of getting a fair trial in this jurisdiction, not every jurisdiction in the state. I think that Auntie Max may very well have sweetened that up for Chauvin when she came out and made her statement, which was at least extremely inappropriate, but it's kind of what we've come to expect from Maxine Waters. And then the fact that the city of Minneapolis awarded a $26 million settlement to George Floyd's heirs before the jury selection process, during the jury selection process. So anybody can make a pretty compelling argument that the jury pool was tainted by what the city did, what Maxine did, and just the high-level interest in the trial caused not only by the death of George Floyd, but by all the rioting, arson, and looting. So when the case goes up for appeal, if the appellate court reverses and remands, we can start all over again. So that's kind of my 2 cents worth on where we are with the verdict. And let's see, I've got R. Carl on the line and Dr. Ron McNinch, also known as the Georgia peach. So let me see what I got for time here. I got about, getting close to my trip to
About 10
Churchill
minutes,
Downs,
yeah.
right? Yeah, well, let me start out with our Carl. Afternoon, our Carl.
Hey, good afternoon, Bob. Yeah, I've got a couple of questions for you. You know, maybe you can translate the legalese going on. I was kind of surprised.
As long as I don't have to use my broken Chamorro, I'll be okay. Siggy,
I was surprised by the outcome. You know, I mean, I've never had any legal training other than my Facebook Juris Doctorate, which I recently got in the mail. But other than that, I'm not even anywhere close to being a lawyer. But my guess would have been that it would have been second or third degree manslaughter. And, you know, I just think, and I think you mentioned something about it, that the pressure the jury felt surely influenced this outcome. And my questions have to do with, and you may have already addressed this, I missed the first hour, but why in the world, given how volatile this trial was, why in the world did they not sequester the jury or move it to a different jurisdiction? I just don't understand that.
well, I did mention it, and Cahill said that he denied the motion for change of venue because he said that as much knowledge, much broadcast, et cetera, there was about the matter, he didn't know that any other jurisdiction would have been any better. But I think he's overlooking something there that probably is not a matter of law, but a matter of common sense. And that is that if he had moved the trial to Detroit Lakes, Minnesota, up in the northwestern part of the state, the jurors in Northwest and Detroit Lakes would have been saying to one another, maybe, well, you know, we don't have to find this guy guilty if we don't think he's guilty. And if we find him not guilty, they're not going to burn down Detroit Lakes. They're going to burn down Minneapolis. So we have a free hand in this. But the folks who live in Minneapolis, you know, it was like, I can't remember who I challenged to do this, but I challenged somebody once to not think about the big white bear. Are you thinking about the big white bear right now, Carl?
I'm trying to, but it's really hard.
You are thinking about the big white bear, and it's the same way for the jurors. Those jurors in Minneapolis are, you know, they listen to the judge. Let's assume they're really conscientious. They know they're supposed to judge on the facts, not on stuff they heard, not on stuff that's outside the trial. But they're sitting there trying not to think about what would happen if they bring in a not guilty verdict. And they can't not do it. Whereas the folks maybe in Albert Lee, Minnesota, wouldn't have been able to do it.
Yeah, and I didn't understand why they didn't sequester, and maybe you can shed a little light on that. Because I think he instructed the jury, you know, now you guys just avoid all this news about the trial, wink, wink.
Yeah.
I just, you know, I would think, you know, that this would be a classic example of a case that absolutely needed for the jury to be sequestered because of how volatile the news was. I don't get it.
Well, maybe when it comes back on remand, people will pay more attention to us, Jose. I mean, real joke. I mean, our Carl.
All right. Well, I'll let the Georgia Peach get in some of his time.
All right.
Thanks, Bob.
Yes, sir.
Today, this is Lieutenant Governor Josh Tenorio. You have an opportunity to make a difference, and it starts here at home. Cleanup projects, no matter the scale, help restore our island's beauty. Governor Liu and I invite our community to join us for the Guam Earth Month Island-wide Beautification Cleanup on Saturday, April 24th at 6 a.m. We all have a part in rebuilding a stronger, cleaner, greener Guam. Call 473-1162 for more details.
Mezcla Chamorro Fusion Bistro in Tumon is back with all your mezcla favorites, like oxtail cadu, Kahlua pig and cabbage, and Chef Peter's style black stew frittata. Mezcla is ready to welcome back everyone with great service in a safe and friendly environment. Come on down and visit Mezcla Chamorro Fusion Bistro in Tumon, located on the first floor lobby of the Grand Plaza Hotel. Open for lunch from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. and for dinner from 5:30 p.m. to 9 p.m. Call 969-2652 for reservations. Mezcla, a true taste of Guam.
Okay, so here we are in Louisville, Kentucky at Churchill Downs for the home stretch of Tall Tales for this afternoon. We're going to bring in a really good writer from Atlanta, known as the Georgia Peach. So what can you tell us about the trial, Ron?
Hey, happy day, Senator. Happy day, Guam. You know, I have to say, I watched every single minute of this trial, I must admit. I stood up late night. Luckily, UOG was on break, so I was able to take a lot of my break time and just watch every single bit of it. It was a very good trial to watch for a number of reasons, especially if you're interested in just how tedious and boring aspects of a criminal trial are to an average listener, because there's so much rigid back and forth that goes on during the process. And I think we've talked about this before, that in criminal justice, the process is the punishment often with these kinds of efforts. But I was bothered by Congresswoman Maxine Waters and the things that she said. I think that she shouldn't have said things like that. I think that she could have expressed her opinion without saying the kinds of things that she said. And the judge, and I think I encourage everyone, if you can, get the direct quote from what the judge said about what Maxine Waters said. And I thought for a moment, watching that part of the trial, the judge was about to declare mistrial right there. I mean, if you look at the judge's face, and if you look at how you could tell how irritated he was about the comment. And I have to say, I think that Derek Chauvin's guilty. He's guilty of something. I'm not sure, as your previous caller said, I'm not a legal expert on criminality or degrees of guilt. I think he did do something illegal. I think he did kill George Floyd, and it was inappropriate. I think it was it was a sad event to certainly watch. But I think that also, especially our elected leaders, have to respect the objectivity of our judicial and legal process. And here's what really bothers me. Without Maxine Waters saying anything, we could have ended up with the exact same, very likely exact same things that we ended up with today without any change. But because that kind of cloud was put over the trial, then it makes it look as if that's the reason, when actually the reason, it was just a trial and there was an outcome. It wasn't because of the threat of violence. They might not have came to that conclusion. We'll never know this now, because those kinds of things were said, and people who want to believe it was those kinds of statements that influenced the jury, they're going to continue to believe it, even if it's not true. And I think that's a part of this riddle. I think also Derek Chauvin knew George Floyd. I think that they worked together at the same nightclub. I think in one early report, the owner said that they had clashed over how Chauvin was treating some of the black guests there on their African-American night, and that Chauvin had pepper sprayed crowds there, and that George Floyd had clashed with him over that. When Floyd was on the ground against that vehicle, I think he called out Derek by his first name. He said, "Come on, Derek." You know, these guys knew each other. And I think
But Ron, you know, that was never part of the trial.
Right.
Where did you find that?
It was in the video. And also it was on the websites early on, talking about Chauvin and talking about Floyd, that these two guys had friction in the past, and of course the defense wouldn't raise it, right?
Well, I'm surprised the prosecution didn't, because that's pretty damning.
Right, exactly, and that I was surprised by that too. Now it could be that they couldn't fully vet out all the facts for the purposes of the court, and that's why the prosecution felt it had such a strong case based solely on the video evidence and everything else. It could have been, you know, how lawyers will make those kinds of decisions where they don't want to muddy the waters with other theories of motivation. But I have to say, for the life of me, I was trying to figure out, I thought part of it too was, I think Chauvin was trying to show off in front of these younger officers by being the tough guy senior officer, and I think he was almost in a field training officer role with one or two of those younger officers, and so he was showing just how tough he was and everything else. I think that was an element of some of his behavior. For me, I'm trying to figure out, how can a person's behavior be so callous and cruel from my standpoint? Because I have to say, police officers have to do a hard job all the time, and they have to handle people in rough ways, because, you know, a lot of the people they're dealing with are not good people at all. They're really they're criminals, and they're going to criminally resist officers. Now, that wasn't the case in this case, but I was trying to figure out what was going on there, because to me, there was more going on there than simply holding that guy down. I thought that there were other things that were going on. I think definitely, and I've seen this happen in case after case, where a field training officer or a more senior officer will do things to show off in front of these younger officers, and they do it to show how tough they are. And I think that's an element of this particular case that hasn't came out. I think that jury should have been sequestered. I think that the venue should have been changed. I agree with you and some of the previous callers. I really thought, if you listen to the audio and the video, watch the video of the judge responding to the defense attorney about the statements that were made over the weekend, it's obvious that judge was not happy. And in fact, he even foreshadowed that's almost, you know, that's a strong basis for possible appeal by the defense. And so I think that that's probably going to come up at some point. But you know, I think what I'm bothered by quite often is that you mentioned about rioting and looting, and I forgot the three that you mentioned: rioting, looting, and
arson,
burning, or arson. Well, there's a fourth one, and that's the threat of doing any of the other things. That's a fourth weapon that's used against public, and these are fear tactics that the public unfortunately has to deal with now in the age of social media.
And it worked. I mean, let's face it, it worked like a charm. The BLM folks and the Antifa folks got everything they asked for.
Yeah, I think that in general, our society and our responses to these kinds of things, we're going to have to learn from them and adjust them. And you mentioned a training module for some of these groups based on this case. Well, I certainly hope it becomes a training module also for police, and in particular, to avoid these kinds of encounters in the future. And I think that would be for the good, that the police, and I think, Senator, there is police brutality. I think we could all admit that. I don't think it's as rampant as some people may want to claim. But I do believe that there is police brutality. I do believe that there's also criminal brutality. And I do believe that dealing with police brutality and other, when police go beyond the scope of their work or go beyond their authority under the badge and gun, I think that we need to have measures to deal with that. On the other hand, the whole defund the police idea and the whole idea to replace police officers with either social workers or mental health workers. I don't see that idea flying anywhere with any veracity in the reality of the violent world we have to live in today. But that's my 2 cents for it.
Okay, well, thanks for calling in, Ron. So it was good talking to you.
Hey, thank you, sir. I love your show. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so the trial, with respect to the trial, something else that I forgot to mention that's really critical here with respect to the verdict. And we've heard from the governor, who, as far as I'm concerned, made a fool out of herself, but we are transparent and accountable to the people. We are transparent with reports, meeting minutes. As far as I'm concerned, we are following everything that we're required to do. Yeah, and then when it comes to the verdict in a criminal case, she is a public figure. She's the governor of a territory, and she comes out and says, she echoes the sentiments of leaders across the nation. The verdict holds Derek Chauvin accountable for his actions, but there's no justice in a system that allows and too often excuses police brutality against people of color, especially the black community. Very good, Governor. The outcome of the trial will not bring back George Floyd and will not end systemic racism. But today we exhale, we mourn, and we continue the fight. She's continuing the fight. I'm so happy for her. So we know where the governor is. The governor is going to continue. She's going to continue the fight. Yeah. But we don't know. The lieutenant governor hasn't weighed in yet. So we don't know if Derek Chauvin got a bad rap. Remember Ike Pareto? When after Ike Pareto was sentenced, the lieutenant governor came forward with some expertise. He had worked at the court.
It can be disappointing.
Yeah, he had worked at the court, and he knows how the system works, and he talked to the investigators at the beginning. So it may very well be that until we hear from the lieutenant governor, we won't be able to put this matter out of our minds, because the lieutenant governor may say Derek Chauvin took a bad rap, and that will just start the whole thing all over again. Right, another Joe?
Talk about, I actually called about...
Right or wrong?
I think that it's wrong to have this narrative of get whitey. But
what do you think about the lieutenant governor?
The lieutenant governor, you said that he didn't come out with a response yet?
He hasn't ruled yet. He hasn't ruled on whether or not Derek Chauvin got a bad rap.
I think they're walking a tightrope because, like you said, they're critical of other cops and other territories or states, but they're not critical of their own cops.
Well, it's very true. We had a shooting here not too long ago, but no worry, because the governor is going to carry on the fight. So I suppose there's a possibility that there might have been an in-house squabble if the lieutenant governor came forward and made the ruling that Derek Chauvin got a bad rap, but the governor came out and said, well, yeah, justice was done. He was held accountable. So maybe that's the reason that the lieutenant governor has been silent on this matter up until now. Where are eagle-eye reporters to track him down and get a statement from him?
That's a good point. It's kind of like the criticism of Mitt Romney. He's not really a Republican. He just has different positions. It's not really clear what his position is because he has different positions.
Right.
But this case, like Mr. Professor McNinch was saying, it just, in my words, it's tainted.
Sorry, another Joe, but we're just about at the end of the rainbow here. Maybe you can call tomorrow, huh? We can get you on tomorrow about Professor McNinch.
No, actually, I was going to say the Republicans need to come out with a statement, pro-life statements, that they're pro-life.
Okay.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much.
The Point is KUSG, Hagåtña, Guam, 93.3 FM and 104.3 HD3.
Minneapolis calm. I'm Jack Callahan, Fox News. In the wake of the guilty verdicts in the Derek Chauvin murder trial,
there were a lot of street celebrations, particularly in the area of 38th and Chicago, the area now known as George Floyd Square. But there was gunfire in that area, now confirmed by the police. 2 suspects are on the run. No information about anyone being shot. Derek Chauvin was found to be guilty. As the verdict was read, Chauvin did not react. He looked around a little bit, but did not look at the jury. He surrendered his hands to be handcuffed when it came time to be led out of the courtroom. He is currently in the same maximum security facility where he was held until he made bail. He's got 8 weeks until sentencing.
Fox's Mike Tobin, George Floyd's nephew Brandon Williams, calling for more prosecutions.
We need each and every officer to be held accountable. And until then, it's still scary to be a black man and woman in America encountering police.
President Biden reacting with a call for police reform.
As we saw in this trial from the fellow police officers who testified, most men and women who wear the badge serve their communities honorably. But those few who fail to meet that standard must be held accountable.
Chauvin faces decades in prison. His attorney is planning an appeal. Shortly before the Chauvin verdict was announced, there was a police shooting in Columbus, Ohio. Officers killing a 15-year-old girl armed with a knife as she lunged at someone with it. Acting Columbus Police Chief Michael Woods.
The Bureau of Criminal Investigation is conducting the criminal investigation into this incident. At the conclusion of that investigation, the Division of Police will conduct an administrative review of the actions of this officer and all officers at scene.
The shooting drew hundreds of protesters to the streets outside Columbus Police Headquarters. America.